Kevin Schindler is a historian in Flagstaff, Arizona, where he has worked for Lowell Observatory for more than 2 decades. He's an active member of the Flagstaff history and science communities. And one of my favorite history books on Flagstaff, Historic Tales of Flagstaff. You can get this here at Riordan Mansion at Lowell or on Amazon. And we are thrilled to have Kevin as our special guest today, sharing why we love Pluto. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it on over to Kevin. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks, Shannon. Great to see you and everybody. And what a great day when we can just stop and talk history. That's a good thing. Let me pull my slideshow up. And in theory, let's see. In theory, you should see the slide. Okay, I love when that happens. So I would like to wish everybody happy Valentine's Day. And what better thing to talk about on Valentine's Day? Well, there's probably better things depending on your background, but a planet that has a heart shape is pretty cool. And then also, happy birthday to all of us. Today is Arizona Statehood Day. We turned 110 today. So lots of neat anniversary type things. And what I'm going to do today in the program is talk about Pluto and the connection to Flagstaff. I'll start by talking about just to review the discovery in not very long, and then kind of go into why Flagstaff is considered the home of Pluto. But before I do that, since this is, there's a lot of connections here we're going to talk about. I'm sure many of you watched the Super Bowl last night. And there's sort of a really distant connection here. It's more of a, wow, that's a nerdy fact. But Clayton Tombaugh on the right here, he's the guy who discovered Pluto in 1930. His cousin, it's a nephew or great nephew, something like that, is Clayton Kershaw, who pitches for the Dodgers. He's one of the best pitchers in baseball. And if you watched the Super Bowl last night, the winning quarterback went to school with Clayton Kershaw. They grew up together. So there they are as kids when they played on sports and everything. And then Kershaw led them to the World Series, and then Stafford last night. So these roommates. So, there's really no connection to Pluto, but I think it's kind of cool. And one of these days, I hope we can get Clayton Kershaw involved in some program here because it'd be kind of fun. So let's talk about Pluto. Pluto was discovered in 1930. People started looking for it in 1905, and when I say people, it was led by this guy, Percival Lowell, who started Lowell Observatory in 1894, initially to search for intelligent life on Mars. And then while he was doing that, he was learning about planets and how they evolve, and predicted that there was another planet out there beyond Neptune. Neptune was the last planet known. So starting in 1905, off and on, he began searching for a planet. And so I want to talk about this search and discovery just for a few minutes, and then we'll talk about the connection. Again, we go back to 1905. There are 8 known planets: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. But Percival Lowell and others believed that there was another planet out there. Based on the irregular movements of Uranus and Neptune, they seem to be wobbling in their orbits, and they couldn't account for that. So there must be yet another planet out there whose gravity was pulling on Uranus and Neptune, making them wobble. And in fact, this is how Neptune was discovered mathematically, predicting where a planet should be. And then it looked in the telescope in that location, and voila, there it was. So Percival Lowell started the search in 1905. He tried different telescopes to take pictures. He also did this mathematically. If you remember the movie a few years back, whose name I just forgot, it had to do with the computers helping the Apollo program with orbits of spacecraft and stuff, Hidden Figures. Well, you remember there are computers in Hidden Figures, people that sat in rooms and did calculations. Well, Lowell Observatory and other observatories in the old days also had computers. This is Lowell's main computer. Her name is Elizabeth Williams. And she was a remarkable woman, the first female to graduate from MIT. And she worked for Lowell's team for years. She wasn't here in Flagstaff, but it was based back east. But she was the main computer. And so she and the team would spend hours looking at the motions of Uranus and Neptune and trying to mathematically calculate where this theoretical planet should be. And once they started searching, they would take pictures in the sky, wait a few days, take pictures of the exact same place. And these pictures captured an area about the size of your fist at arm's length. And what they were doing is, when you look at these pictures on a machine called a blink comparator, and that's this machine right here, there's a little eyepiece. And when you look through that, you see a small section of one of the photographic plates, and it's magnified. And then there's a mirror inside this mechanism that flips, and you look at the same small section over here. And so you put this on automatic, and you keep flipping back and forth, looking at one plate to the other. And what you're looking at are dots. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dots. And you're looking at every one of those to see if it's changed position over a few days' time. This is how they physically searched for Pluto, because the idea was that, if you take a picture of the sky, you'll see all these dots. Most of them are stars. Well, in a few days' time, stars, they're so far away, they appear to be in the same position relative to each other. But something a lot closer to us, like a planet in our solar system, in a few days' time is going to change position really fast compared to those background stars. It's like, when you drive down the road and the ditch is flying by, but the trees on the horizon are going a lot slower. We're looking for something flying by, something a lot closer. It really was a needle in the haystack sort of thing. Well, they spent several years doing this, but the search came to a halt in 1916 when Percival Lowell died. And that was it for the search for Planet X, as he called it. Well, jump ahead a decade later, and the observatory finally got back into action. It was pretty slow going for a while because of funding and such. But the observatory in late 1920s began really operating again, and the new person in charge, the trustee, said, Uncle Percy was onto something. Uncle Percy is kind of a nickname for our founder, Percival Lowell, because the observatory even today is essentially owned and managed at the top level by a family member. So the new trustee said, Uncle Percy was onto something. Let's recommence that search and look for that planet he thought was out there. And this will get us back into the astronomy world again. So they built this telescope. And I love these old pictures because you think before they had cranes, how do you build stuff? They used these booms, like these big telephone poles with ropes, and that's how they would lift heavy things up. So they built this telescope, and they hired this fella. And this fella's name is Clayton Tombaugh. When he was 23 years old, he had graduated from high school a few years earlier, living in a little community called Burdett, Kansas. And during the daytime, he farmed. And at nighttime, he built his own telescopes and looked through the telescopes. One of those telescopes is this one he made out of farm parts from the creamery on the farm. And so he got pretty good at this. What else is there to do on the farm in Kansas at night? Look at the sky. And so he got pretty good at this. And in late 1920s, he thought, I've gotten so good, I don't want to be a farmer. I want to start thinking about what else I want to do in life. And so he decided he would gather some of his planetary drawings and send them off to see what, quote unquote, real astronomers thought of them. Well, he thought of Lowell Observatory as a place to send these because when he was a kid, he remembered reading about Percival Lowell and his ideas about life on Mars. And he thought these people are experts in planets and study of planets. I'm going to send my drawings to them. So he sent a note to the director at the time, Vesto Slifer, VM Slifer. And he got a really curious note back that asked him things like, what kind of physical condition are you in? And you've really learned about astronomy. Do you want to do more with that? Because it turns out, in a great moment of coincidence, it was just at that moment that the observatory, they had recommenced the search, they were building the telescope, but they needed somebody to do the actual observations because the observatory staff consisted of 3 astronomers. One of them, E.C. Slifer, was in the state legislature in Phoenix at the time. So there wasn't really anybody to do the actual work with it. So as the director is I almost said emailing, well, the director is mailing and contacting colleagues around the country, asking if they know of anybody who might be able to work here. He gets this letter from this self-taught farmer who really seems to know his stuff. So that's how Clyde Tombaugh got here. If Tombaugh wrote the letter a few months earlier, a few months later, he probably wouldn't have ended up working here. It was just a great timing. So he came out here, began starting the search again for this planet X in the fall of 1929. And within a year, he would make a discovery that would change his life, the life of Flagstaff, the life of astronomy forever. And by that time, he was a ripe old age of 24 years old. So you imagine, I don't know, I imagine going back when I was 24 years old and discovering a new planet. I mean, we knew of planets, we knew of 6 planets from early on history before we even had telescopes because you could see them in the night sky. And then 2 more were discovered after telescopes came along, none in the United States, none in the 20th century. In fact, many people thought, astronomers at the time thought, we know all there's going to be to know about the solar system. We've tapped it out. Little did they know. So Clyde Tombaugh changed all that. So we go to February 18th, 1930. So we're just, as we do this program, we're just a few days away from the 92nd anniversary. And Clyde Tombaugh got up that morning like he did many mornings. He was living in an apartment, which is right next to my office where I'm sitting right now. And in the morning, he went downtown. And back then, there was a now famous place called the Black Cat Cafe. And that was one of the great places to eat. That's where Clyde took a lot of his meals. So he went to the Black Cat Cafe, had breakfast, and then he came back up the observatory and he stared at a bunch of dots. This is a small field of view of dots. And I've cheated here. We have an arrow pointing to Pluto. If you look closely over on the left side, there's this arrow with the dot. And if you look at the same relative place on the right side, that dot's not there. It's changed position. Imagine looking through this, systematically going across, looking for dots that change position. But that's what he did. So he spent a lot of time doing this. Then it got to be lunchtime. He went back downtown again to the Black Cat Cafe. And then he went over to the post office. And the post office at that time was located where Arizona Sports, and this picture is a couple of years old, Arizona Handmaid's now on the other side of the road. But this is where the post office was. And so he went there to pick up mail. And then he came back in the afternoon and sat back down at the blink comparator and did some more work. Let me stop that a second. Did some more work. And he's looking through the blink comparator, and about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he saw these dots that change position. And I'm glossing over how complex and how difficult this was. But he often saw dots that seemed to change position that indicated, could be a planet, but maybe it's an asteroid. Or maybe it's a star that was bright one day, but it faded days later. Or maybe it was a speck of dust on the emulsion. So it was very time consuming to stop and check these things out. But he did stop, he did check it out, he remeasured and realized, holy cow, I think I found the planet. And for the next few hours, he and colleagues Carl Lamplund and the director, VM Slifer, examined the pictures, looked at some backup pictures they had, and realized, holy cow, we think this is a planet. And VM Slifer said, okay, Clyde, when it gets dark later on, come back. Now that we know where in the sky to look, because we used a small telescope that has a wide field of view, now that we know where to look, go to the big 24-inch refractor. And that's that big telescope in the dome that you can see from all around Flagstaff. So go in there tonight. When that telescope really magnifies a lot more, see if you can zoom in and see if it's circular, if it has moons, see what we can figure out. So Clyde, oh my gosh, he's 24 years old. He's told not to tell anybody, not even his family. And he has to hold it in. What's he going to do for the next few hours? He goes downtown and has dinner at the Black Cat Cafe. And then he went over to the Orpheum Theater, and it's getting dark, but it's cloudy. So 24 years old, he's discovered this planet. He wants to confirm it. It's cloudy. So he decides to go see a movie, The Virginian with Gary Cooper. And, you know, he steps outside a couple times during the movie and it's still cloudy. And so he has to wait till another night to confirm the discovery. And that must have been a very, very long night for him. But he did just confirm the discovery. And over the ensuing weeks, the observatory continued studying this object and realized that, in fact, it is a planet. And so on March 13th, they decided to announce the discovery to the world. Now, officially, they would announce it through a scientific publication, but also they announced it locally. Carl Lamplund, one of the scientists, was scheduled to be at what's now called Northern Arizona University to announce the prize that Percival Lowell's widow had set up, the Lowell Prize. So that there was this big gathering at Old Main, and specifically inside Old Main Ashurst Auditorium. And at that event, Carl Lamplund announced to Flagstaff the discovery of this new planet. And the kind of curious thing about it is there was no PA system, and people that attended that afterwards said they couldn't understand what he was saying. Didn't realize that he was talking about this new planet that was discovered right in our backyard here. But they did soon find out about it. It made coverage of newspapers from the Coconino Sun to the top above the fold of the New York Times. And it made news around the world and really put Flagstaff on the map as a place where Lowell Observatory was discovered. And Flagstaff was already known as a science community, but this really, really cemented that. And just a little bit of, because we're historians here, and I'm not telling much of the science story, but another kind of fun part of the Pluto story, because there's so much personality to the Pluto story. After it was announced, this made news around the world, and people from around the world sent in telegrams and letters to the observatory suggesting what to call it. Because if you discover a planet, you get to name it. Well, and we still have more than 200 of this correspondence in the archives, and it's really fascinating to look through. I think one thing that's really neat is that if you look at these letters and telegrams, you can, even if you didn't know the date, you could kind of tell when this discovery took place based on the suggestions. For instance, there were several that suggested naming it after Carl Lindbergh, who had just flown across the Atlantic a few years ago. And several suggested the name Peace, or the god of peace, Pax, because the 1930s were billed as the decade of peace. Started off well, didn't end so well in that regard. So lots of suggestions. And in fact, several people suggested Pluto, the god of the underworld, and that made sense because the planet was so far away. But the first suggestion of Pluto came from a telegram on behalf of this 11-year-old girl from England, Venetia Burney. And the observatory said, boy, we really like the name Pluto. Let's call it Pluto because, again, Pluto in mythology is the god of the underworld. Also in mythology, Pluto had siblings, and a couple of siblings are Saturn and I think it's Neptune, which are already in the solar system. And then, in a nice twist of isn't this cool, they said, we're going to also not only name the planet, but give it its abbreviation, which isn't really used in science much, but it's used more culturally. But Mars, for instance, its symbol is the circle with the arrow pointing up, like the symbol for males. And the symbol for Venus is the same as that for females, the circle with the cross pointing down. Well, for Pluto, they decided to use a combination of Pluto's first two letters, P and L, which are also Percival Lowell's initials. So it was a really great, nod to Percival Lowell. Even though he didn't live to see the discovery, he still is recognized for it. And so what does this have to do with, how did this translate into Pluto being so connected with Flagstaff? Of course, the discovery is big, but you don't get called the home of a place because of just the discovery necessarily. There's a lot more to the story, and that's what I want to talk about next. Before I talk about that, I just wanted to say one more thing about the name, because this is a question we get all the time. Oh, they named the planet after the dog, right? Well, when I first got here, I heard that question a lot. And so I tried contacting Disney's history section, and they could trace the name of Pluto, but not exactly the reason why Walt Disney used the name Pluto. But what we do know is that Pluto, the lovable little puppy, was first used in a cartoon in the Chain Gang in September 1930. So that's several months after Pluto was discovered. And then the name was changed to Rover in the Picnic in October of that year. And then Rover became Pluto the pup the following year in May of 1931. So the name Pluto wasn't used till 1931, well after Pluto was discovered. So the planet was not named after the dog, although it's certainly likely that the dog was named after the planet because Disney was very into science, as a lot of his programming later showed. So it shows how that entered cultural history. So there's so many cool ties that have nothing to do with anything, but it's fun. So why is this home of Pluto? We've had the discovery here, and I guess really, if you discover something, maybe that is good enough reason to say you're the home of it. But there's a lot more in regards to Flagstaff. First of all, scientifically, virtually every major scientific discovery having to do with Pluto has Flagstaff ties. In 1978, this gentleman, his name is Jim Christie, he was working for the Naval Observatory stationed back east, but he was studying Pluto and he needed some pictures of it. And so pictures of it were taken at the telescope of the Naval Observatory here in town. And he discovered that Pluto had a moon that he named Charon. So it's amazing that within 4 miles of where Clyde Tombaugh discovered Pluto, the discovery pictures of Charon were also taken. So this is Jim holding up pictures, and I'll tell you how hard this is. This is one picture of Pluto. This is from the 1970s. Here's the other one. And you notice how this one has this extra oblong. It's not quite circular. That's Pluto and Charon behind it. And he had several pictures, and sometimes the lobe was here. Sometimes he couldn't see it. Sometimes it was over here. So he realized that there was a moon orbiting around it. That's not much to see. Well, he got to choose the name, and there's a great story. I won't go into the whole detail, but he originally wanted to call it maybe Oz, after the Wizard of Oz, but there's a certain convention you have to name it after Roman gods and goddesses, and so he thought maybe I'll name it Charon, like proton and neutron, because his wife's name is Charlene, so that would be nice to name it after her. And maybe Charon, it sounds like those other words. Well, here's the dictionary. He looked at his dictionary he had back in the 1970s, and he looked up Charon, and holy cow, Charon is the Roman god of the river Styx. It was the ferryman of the river Styx that carried the dead to the world of Pluto. How unlikely is that? And so he named it Charon. So it's partly after Charlene, and partly it fits the convention of naming it. Jim and Char they moved to Flagstaff years later, and they live in Flagstaff now. And in fact, they're going to be at our big I Heart Pluto Festival on February 18th. So it's just, again, the personal story with Pluto. There's so much great science, but there's a lot of personality with it. So Jim discovered Charon, and then through the years, some of you may remember Bob Millis, our director for a long time here, Ralph Nye, who took care of all our instruments, and Larry Wasserman is still working as an astronomer here. For years, they would take telescopes on adventures around the world to view occultations. And occultations happen when something in the solar system, a planet, for instance, passes in front of a distant star. And when that happens, that distant star's light will be blinked out. Well, you can learn a lot from these things. You can tell, you can measure the time it takes for the light to go out and then come back on again. And that allows you to determine the diameter of the planet that's blocking out the light. The rings of Uranus were discovered this way. And also, this team and others discovered Pluto's atmosphere in 1988 using this technique. And these occultations are great because there's only a small area in the world where you can view them from. And you never know what it is, where it's going to be. It all has to do with the alignment of the bodies and where a shadow is cast. And so they've gone to Mexico, to Australia, lots of different places to observe these things. And they discovered the atmosphere of Pluto. And then years after that, when Pluto was discovered, it was a dot. When the Hubble telescope came along, they were able to create maps that weren't very good by today's standards, but they had some darker areas and some lighter areas. That difference in brightness is called albedo. And so Mark Bowie at the observatory here and some others that he worked with created the first maps of Pluto. After we got the close-up pictures of Pluto, we found that those maps were actually very accurate. It doesn't look like much, but it actually was pretty important. So moons of Pluto, the first maps of Pluto, the atmosphere of Pluto, all these things have connections to Flagstaff. And this isn't just historical. Even today, over the past several years, Northern Arizona University has a lab, a cryogenics lab, where they can recreate the frigid temperatures of space, so that you can model in the laboratory what you're observing, through telescopes and such. So it really is great for modeling. So this is happening here in Flagstaff also, in addition to basic research going on with Pluto and the outer solar system. Well, Pluto and Flagstaff and that connection really went on world stage in 2015, because that's when the New Horizons spacecraft flew by Pluto and showed us that Pluto is not a dot anymore, it's a world. That's really exciting. And during this event, NASA TV was doing live broadcasts from Mission Control back in Maryland. And this is when they had just released the first pictures from New Horizons. Here's the moderator for NASA TV. And if you look at these panelists that are here, Alan Stern, the principal investigator, is on the Lowell Observatory Advisory Board. Will Grundy is a longtime scientist here. Kathy Olkin worked here for Lowell for years. She did a postdoc here. John Spencer worked at Lowell here for years. And so 4 out of the 5 people here worked or had connections with Lowell Observatory. And this is the whole world watching this. And I was looking at this thinking, my gosh, Flagstaff and Pluto, look at the connection scientifically. It's remarkable. And again, whatever it was, all these years, 85 years after Pluto made headlines, Pluto again was on the cover of the New York Times. And here's the cover on July 16th after they got the first good picture. And this is above the fold again, New York Times. And down here, I've circled here, Will Grundy, an investigator working to analyze the surface composition of Pluto. They have a quote by him. So here we are, again, front page of the New York Times and news around the world for our planet. Now, remember, I showed you before that Pluto is on the front page of the New York Times Discovery. This just cracks me up, and I show this to Will. Here's Will Grundy being quoted. Well, if we go back to that newspaper, the New York Times in 1930, Grundy is highlighted again. Not the same Grundy, but it's just funny to see his name on the front page all that time earlier. So over the span of decades, again, virtually every major discovery has turned Pluto from this dot to this world where we can see some lighter and darker areas to a real world with this heart-shaped feature and mountains and valleys and craters. It's really neat. And if you look, here's this heart shape, what's called Tombaugh regio. And you can see a lobe of that, and kind of here, that early mapping they did. So it matches up pretty nicely. So the scientific connection between Pluto and Flagstaff is huge. The last thing I want to do is show you how that has really become part of our culture. If you go west on West University, that's where ADOT now is. There's the South Tombaugh Way. Paula Rice, one of our really outstanding artists in town, has created 2 pieces about Pluto. One is part of this set that's in Ardrey Auditorium. This is her first piece about Pluto with the frigid toes. And then this is a later piece she did that's now in the rotunda up here at Lowell Observatory. And this is Paula. You might recognize her. And here she is with Alan Stern when we did a Pluto event here several years ago. So there's art. George Averbeck, most of you probably know, has done ornaments that are Pluto themed. And so it's entered into the art. So you come up here at Lowell Observatory and you can see this bust of Clyde Tombaugh. And a couple of years ago, the year of Pluto, we put a t-shirt on him. And this is Clyde's 2 children, Elle and Annette, who visit here periodically. So there's such a connection with Pluto that we decided a couple of years ago to start an I Heart Pluto Festival to celebrate this really unique connection and to do it every year leading up to and beyond the 100th anniversary in 2030. And from this has come even more cultural connections. Downtown, Karma Sushi every year creates a Pluto roll. Here's the menu from the first year they made it. And here's Annette Tombaugh trying the Pluto roll. And the reason we did this, Karma Sushi did this, is because, this is where Clyde ate the day he discovered Pluto. And here we are 85 years later, Clyde's daughter eating in the same restaurant. Wait for the Train has made Pluto roast. They don't have that right now, but they've made that in the past. Mother Road Brewing Company has been a really great partnership. A couple of years ago, they made Pluto Porter, and here I am with Alan Stern being nerds here. This is the Lowell Lager that they made this year, and it's got this iconic picture of Percival Lowell sitting at the telescope. And if you look closely, he's holding a can of beer in his hand, which is not quite the part of the original. The runway that used to be known as Savano on South San Francisco, they've created this special galaxy drink that has, red berry vodka, blue curacao, lemon juice, raspberry, and other stuff. They've created this, and you can get this now at the runway. Flag Tag is partnered this year, and they're doing this axe throwing thing that has, you can see the sun is in the middle. You've got Pluto and Charon. Here's Pluto with the heart shape in it. So that's the target for that. So there's just so many ways Flagstaff is being connected with Pluto. And that's why, we call it the home of Pluto. And there's recognition around the world. And we just started our I Heart Pluto Festival this past Saturday. And every night there's virtual programs and some on-site programs. And then on the 18th, we're doing an event at the Orpheum. To the very minute that Clyde Tombaugh was watching a movie at the Orpheum Theater, we're going to be in there celebrating his discovery 92 years later. So really great connections. If you want to read more, there's this book, Pluto and Lowell Observatory, you can find that talks about these connections. But for me, it's just really fun to talk about this because I'm a Lowell homer all the way. I love talking about Lowell and Pluto, but I'm also a Flagstaff homer. And when you can connect, this Pluto and the community, it's such a, it's the identity is, it's not one or the other. It's not Lowell Observatory as home of Pluto, it's Flagstaff. And it's really fun to be able to talk about this and spread the excitement of it, where you have this important science that has been done and is being done, but when it enters our culture and becomes part of the fabric of who we are, I think that's a pretty neat thing to be able to see. So with that, I'll stop yapping. I could talk about this all day because it's fun, but I'll stop talking and I'll stop sharing here. So if we have any questions or comments, we can chat about that now. And Nikki, yeah, see, sports and history, there's a connection. It's a pretty tenuous one, although, Clyde Tombaugh and Clayton Kershaw are related to each other.
That is so fun. Kevin, thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Well, it's great to be able to talk about this. And I start out calm and collected, and I start getting excited and talking too fast. Because it's pretty fun stuff.
Agreed.
Oh, I see Kathy joined us. It's great to see you, Kathy. Karen and Nikki.
Hello. Great to listen to you. I didn't catch the whole thing, but I'm here now.
Well, I think you know the story pretty well. You could write this. You've heard so many elements of this through the past.
But it's not the same without you.
So I think for those people, well, you don't have to drink beer to get a low lager can. They're going to have them while supplies last at Mother Road, both at their tap room downtown and also at the Orpheum on the 18th. We'll have them there also.
Very cool collector's item.
Well, let me show you something quick here on my shelf. Here's the low lager that, as it turns out, is empty. But here's a low lager, and this shows that iconic picture of Percival Lowell inside the telescope. Well, unbeknownst to us, Dark Sky Brewing also created the can that has the telescope from the outside on it.
Cool.
And so, they have this in their tap room right now. And it's kind of funny because that's a little alien down here in the spaceship up here. But anyways, with this can, they didn't work with anybody here. They just did it because it's kind of cool. And so now we're started a partnership with them that was had off and on, but we're doing more now. Oh, and the Riordan brews, Shannon, you were mentioning of you guys working with them, and it's not about. It's kind of fun to have the beer and everything if you like beer, but to me, it's the collaboration with community and how places that don't do the same thing, but you still connect because we have a common theme in Flagstaff. I just love this. I'm really looking forward to that. Are they going to be making a can?
Yes, they're looking at what the design is going to be right now, but
Yeah.
yes, so we are very excited about that.
Oh, that's great. I think I'm going to be doing more of this because I mean Lowell is, Lowell's a great place and everything, but we have a lot of great places in Flagstaff, and it's fun to be able to highlight this as part of their theme of the Mother Road, Route 66. That's their identity, but all these things in Flagstaff that help create that identity. It's pretty neat.
Agreed. Well, if we don't have any questions, Kevin, thank you so much. And again, we recorded this today, so it should be up on our website in a couple of weeks, so we can share this with more people. And I encourage everyone to go to Lowell's website and see everything going on for the I Heart Pluto Festival.
Thanks. Great to see everybody.
Yes, agree. Take good care. Have a wonderful rest of your day.